Madam President, it's a pleasure to be here on the Senate floor tonight on an occasion that many of us, if not all of us, have waited days, months, years. We've been working a long time to return the United States Senate to the position in which we actually legislate, to the position in which appropriation bills, after a top-line number, a budget number is determined, the Committee on Appropriations begins the deliberation after weeks, months of consideration, of information, of witnesses, of testimony, of reports and requests from our colleagues across the Senate. Sometimes I think the appropriators are thought of as a unique group of people, but isn't the reality that every member of the United States Senate is an appropriator? That's because when the committee finishes its work, upon our conclusion of our deliberations and our votes, then every member of the United States Senate has an opportunity to speak and to amend the legislation that we've developed. Appropriations is really an opportunity for us to make sure that the taxpayers' dollars are well spent, that we look for opportunities to reduce spending where it's inappropriate, and support projects and functions of government that matter to the American people. From things that affect people in their daily lives to the broad picture of our country's national security. So, Mr. President, Madam President, I congratulate the leaders of the Senate. The majority leader who, upon his election to serve as majority leader, determined that he was going to be certain that we return to something we call, in days gone by, regular order, in which the committee passes 12 appropriation bills and the Senate considers those 12 appropriation bills. They're considered by the House and, when conferenced and reconciled, off to the President. In the absence of that, the Congress of the United States and my colleagues in the Senate, we lose authority and control over one of our primary responsibilities. On behalf of the American people, we make decisions about their hard-earned dollars and how they are spent. We make decisions about how to avoid spending that is wasteful. And that appropriation process has been absent for way too long in this body. The bills that we are about to consider, and there'll be a unanimous consent request made by me in a few moments. And that unanimous consent request will ask that 4 appropriation bills be considered by the United States Senate beginning this evening. 4 appropriation bills, because those 4 appropriation bills have come through the committee process. Almost without exception, they've been approved in a largely bipartisan way, in many instances unanimously by every Republican and Democrat on the committee. And in every instance, they were passed by supported by both Republicans and Democrats. The Appropriations Committee, although we from time to time have our challenges, like every other committee in the Senate, has a reputation for working together to get a good result. And we are accomplishing that in the efforts that we are bringing to the Senate, to our colleagues tonight, to the American people, to see our work product on 4 bills. That process requires unanimous consent, that every member, all 100 of us, have an opportunity to make certain that they are ready to proceed. It's required because we are adding these bills to a House bill on the Senate floor, and to do so, we have to ask every senator, do we have your permission to do so? And that's what's going to take place here in a moment. The bills we're talking about tonight, the bill that's on the Senate floor, the House bill, the package by which we have to utilize because the Constitution requires that appropriation bills commence in the House of Representatives. So a House bill is on the Senate floor this evening, and we're going to ask unanimous consent to add 3 other bills to that House bill. Those 3 other bills are agriculture, the legislative branch, and commerce, justice, science. And I'm somewhat of an expert on many of the topics included in those 4 bills, but I chair the subcommittee in the Appropriations Committee that appropriates for the Department of Commerce, the Department of Justice, and a collection of agencies involved in science. And in that effort to find a balance and support our bills, and I'll speak to the one that I am most familiar with, we've worked in a bipartisan way to create a product that is broadly supported by every member of the committee at least has the thought that they had a good chance and opportunity to participate in the process and got a bipartisan result. For my colleagues who know me, I came here to legislate. I have had the opportunity to work in the United States Senate where legislation has been more rare than I want it to be, and I'm proud of our efforts to bring members of this body together to see that we have an end product for consideration by our colleagues and presumably passage by the United States Senate, consideration by the House, and a signature by the President. We don't legislate often enough, as I said, and the sad thing is that I've said this before to my colleagues, I don't know why anybody would want to be a member of the United States Senate if it wasn't to accomplish results, to work together to get a product that meant something for the benefit of our constituents back home, that meant something for the brighter and better future for American people and made our country more safe and secure. And when we don't do our responsibilities, when we're unable to accomplish that goal, we harm not only the institution of the United States Senate and its role in our government, but we harm the American people. In the bill that I'm most responsible for in this package of four, the Department of Commerce is what you might expect it to be. It affects our business communities and climate. It affects international trade. It's important for communications and telecommunications and broadband. It's a broad array of issues and agencies within the Department of Commerce that we are monitoring, we are making certain they are performing correctly as to the best of our ability, and we're determining how much money they need to operate. The Department of Justice is one that certainly comes home to the American people quickly. It's about, in many instances, about law enforcement. This department funds, for example, the FBI, the DEA, the ATF, the U.S. Marshals, and they fund many of our local grants to our local sheriffs and police departments. Hugely important for the safety and well-being of the American citizens. We've been at this process, and we are making certain that we have done everything we can to make certain that law enforcement are adequately resourced for the protection of the American people and themselves. And science, that's the third component of the bill I'm most familiar with. Science is, among other things, NASA, our exploration of space, the study of STEM education, the opportunity to excite young men and women, boys and girls across the country who see an astronaut in space and dream the dream of being that person in their future, and in that process have a love for STEM education, for science, mathematics, engineering, research, something so important to the future of our nation, something that protects us as an economy and, as importantly, protects us in our national defense. And we also invest in something called NSF, the National Science Foundation, again, where we produce products and research and information that enhance the quality of life, the future of our country, and our national security. A very hugely important bill to the United States Senate. And more importantly, it's important to us because it's important to America. So the goal this evening is to see that that bill, Commerce, Justice, Science, and the other bills, other two bills are added to the House bill that's before us that funds veterans and military construction. So to start this process on the appropriations process, and again, let me thank the Majority Leader, the Senator from South Dakota, my colleague, the Vice Chairman of the Senate Committee on Appropriations, the Senator from Washington, Senator Murray, and the Chairwoman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, the Senator from Maine, who have worked so diligently to get us to the point that we are tonight. Nothing has been easy, but there's been significant compromise and efforts to work together at a time in which the Senate finds too many reasons to be divided. It's enjoyable to be on a committee in which, even though we have our differences, and even though there have been things that have intruded on each of our desires to have something done in the committee. There's been problems that come from the outside that distract us from our ability to work together, this committee said we acknowledge the distractions, we acknowledge the differences, but we're going to do everything this year to make certain that the appropriations process works. So, Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that a time to be determined by the Majority Leader, in consultation with the Democratic Leader, the Senate resume consideration of calendar number 121, H.R. 3944, and the committee reported substitute amendment be withdrawn. That during that consideration, H.R. 3944, the Collins substitute amendment number 3038, be considered an Appropriation Committee amendment for purposes of Rule 16, that no other Rule 16 point of order waived by this agreement. That H.R. 3944, Milcon, as engrossed by the House of Representatives on June the 25th, 2025, H.R. 4121, Ag, as reported by the House Appropriations Committee on June 25th, 2025, and the bill making appropriations for the Department of Commerce and Justice, Science, and related agencies for the fiscal year ending September 30, 2026, and for other purposes, as reported by the House Committee on Commerce, Justice, Science, and related agencies to the House Appropriations Committee on July 15, 2025, serve as the basis for defense of germaneness under Rule 16 for any floor amendments, and that it be in order for the floor amendments to amend the substitute in more than one way. That the manager's package of amendments be considered and agreed to en banc to number 3038. That is Paul number 3070, Shaheen Grassley number 3042, Smith number 3025, Hirono number 3090, Rounds number 3081, Rounds number 3082, Bud Shaheen number 3072, Hawley number 3080, Rosen Cortez Masto number 2975, Cornyn number 3073, Hirono number 3110, Shaheen 3041, Klobuchar number 3121, Crapo Rosen number 3163, Blumenthal number 3000, and that upon adoption of the manager's package, the only amendments in order be the following amendments, if offered, to number 3038, and that at the time to be determined by the Majority Leader in consultation with the Democratic Leader, the Senate vote in relation to the following amendments: Merkley number 3114, Murphy number 2972, Van Hollen number 3115, Kennedy number 3088, Kennedy number 3089, Scott number 3113, Scott number 3108, Johnson number 3079, Van Hollen number 3126. Further, upon disposition of the amendments listed above, the Senate vote on adoption of the substitute amendment 3038 is amended with 60 affirmative votes threshold required for adoption. The bill is amended, if amended, be read a third time, and the Senate vote on passage of the bill as amended, if amended, with a 60-vote affirmative threshold to require passage. And finally, Madam President, notwithstanding passage of H.R. 3944 as amended, if amended, it be in order to consider an amendment, the text of which is identical to Senate 2257, Ledge Branch Appropriations. The Senate vote on adoption of the amendment, and if adopted, H.R. 3944 be further amended, and the motion to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table with no intervening action. Madam President, what all those words mean is that we are taking 3 appropriation bills, adding them to the underlying House bill that's on the Senate floor for consideration, and that we've outlined what amendments we will adopt by a manager's package and what amendments will be made in order for consideration by the full Senate as to whether or not they should be adopted.
Is there objection?
Madam Chair.
Senator from Maryland.
Reserving the right to object. And I object to the end request, but I want to begin on a point of agreement, which is, other than the final request made by the good senator for Kansas, I agree with everything he said. As he said, we have 4 appropriation bills bundled together here, proposed to be bundled together here: military construction, veterans, agriculture, Ledge Branch, and the Commerce, Justice, Science bill. And I have the privilege of working with Chairman Moran on what we call the CJS bill. and it makes very important targeted investments in a whole range of areas that he described. And of course, one of the areas of jurisdiction of this subcommittee is the Department of Justice and the FBI. And in my view, we absolutely have an obligation to make sure we address the needs and the mission of the men and women of the FBI, that we provide the resources to carry out that mission, and that we make sure that they're safe in conducting that mission. And I'm here on the floor objecting to this request today because just a short time ago, the Trump administration took $1.4 billion that this Congress had set aside on a bipartisan basis and proposed that instead of going to a site for a new headquarters that had met the security requirements and that had gone through a competition, the administration proposed to effectively rescind those funds and use them for a different purpose without presenting a plan as to how their alternative would meet the security requirements for the men and women of the FBI. I'm not going to repeat the whole history over many, many years that this Senate has gone through with respect to ensuring that the men and women of the FBI have a new headquarters that's fit for purpose and meets the security requirements. I will only point out that the FBI, in making the determination with respect to where they had planned to go before the Trump administration's intervention, said this, and I quote, "Because of the symbolic nature of the client mission and performance of functions critical to the security of the United States, a facility security level 5 designation was selected for this campus." In all the work that this Senate has done and all the work to date at the FBI, it has been determined that wherever the FBI makes its new home and new headquarters, it has to meet the level 5 security requirements because of the special mission of those men and women, and because I think all of us want to make sure that they are protected in the greatest degree that we can make sure their security is protected. So in the Appropriations Committee, I worked on an amendment that would have said that the FBI has to move its new headquarters to the place that had already won the competition and already been selected, and one of the reasons is it had met the level 5 security requirement. I'm not asking that in the amendment that I proposed for the floor today. I asked for something very straightforward. I proposed an amendment that simply says that wherever the FBI chooses to make its new headquarters, it has to meet the level 5 security requirements that it itself has laid out as necessary to defend the safety of the men and women who do that important work. That is an amendment that we should include in this bill, and that is why I'm here right now objecting to the proposal that's being put forward, because while we put an even stronger version of that amendment at one point in our bill in the Appropriations Committee, that action was then reversed. And so now I am proposing that we just put the other alternative forward, and again, based on the consistent position taken by the FBI, taken by members of the Senate, that level 5 security requirement is important, and wherever they go, they should be able to do a study. They should be able to conduct a study before they move people into a new headquarters, before they put people at risk, to show that that new place, wherever it may be, is fit for purpose and meets those security requirements. That is a simple request that I would have thought all of us could stand behind, making sure that The new headquarters of the men and women FBI meets the security requirements that we and they have set out. And so that is why I reserve the right to request, and I will now ask the senator to modify his request so that my amendment, number 3126, be included in the list of amendments in the manager's package to be adopted en bloc.
Will the senator from Kansas so modify his request?
Reserving the right to object. Madam President, let me explain what the senator from Maryland is asking be done. And I explained earlier that there's a set of amendments that is in this unanimous consent request that are put into a manager's package where they've been agreed by both the Republican and Democrat leaders of the Senate. In other words, there's been agreement that these amendments are satisfactory and will be adopted upon the adoption of that amendment. The senator from Maryland's amendment that he seeks is not in that list because it's in the other list I described. The list that requires a vote of the Senate to determine whether or not that amendment should be adopted, in this case by 51 votes of the Senate. So Senator Van Hollen's, the senator from Maryland's request is, can I move my amendment? Can we modify the unanimous consent request to move my amendment to the place that it's assured of being passed, rather than leave it in the place in which he offers that amendment during the debate of the bills, the underlying bills that we're talking about this evening, in this case, Commerce, Justice, Science, and allow the members of the United States Senate to agree or disagree by approving his amendment with 51 votes or not. So, Madam President, the change in procedure is, do I get my amendment approved by unanimous agreement, or do I have to earn the votes of 51 senators to have my amendment approved? And the reality is, there is not unanimous agreement that the amendment that the senator is speaking, the senator from Maryland is speaking about, there is absolutely not unanimous agreement across this Senate floor. Perhaps not even in a bipartisan, not in a partisan way. There may not be agreement from the Democrat members of the Senate, and there may not be agreement from the Republican members of the Senate, and therefore it's impossible for us to agree to allow an amendment that we know has controversy and is not acceptable to 100 senators to get this special privilege of being adopted so easily. The underlying unanimous consent request allows for the amendment that the senator from Maryland is proposing. He has the right to offer the amendment on the floor. That has been agreed to, but that is insufficient for the senator, and he wants to modify his amendment to be more easily, in fact, automatically accepted. This issue, sadly, if the senator from Maryland ultimately objects to the underlying request, if he is not able to have his consent agreement modified to get the amendment in the position he wants, he then has to decide, if he fails in that regard, he has to decide, do I want to object to all the bills, all 4 of them from being considered? And unfortunately, that includes Commerce, Justice, Science, which I and the senator from Maryland have worked on together as the chairman of that committee and as the ranking member or vice chair of that committee. And should he ultimately object to the entire package here because he isn't successful on this request to move his amendment, then all the work that he and I and the members of the subcommittee and the members of the full committee and other senators in their input have put together that passed in a bipartisan way out of the committee, that bill will fall by the wayside. We will then not consider Commerce, Justice, Science tonight, tomorrow, next week, and in my view, the United States Senate will never see Commerce, Justice, Science Appropriation Bill on the Senate floor. And therefore, our work to fund NASA, to fund the National Science Foundation, to fund our police in our home communities and our sheriffs in our home counties, to support the FBI, the DEA, the ATF, and the U.S. Marshals, and to support the Department of Commerce in its efforts to grow the country's economy, provide broadband to our constituents at home, rural and urban, and to support the efforts of trying to find trade agreements by this administration and the efforts at USTR to find those satisfactory agreements that grow our nation's economy, the work that we've gone through to this point becomes irrelevant. If this was a momentary setback, I'd feel less concerned, less emotional, less connected to the desire of having this bill see consideration on the Senate floor in this package. Our appropriations process, which I have bragged about tonight, our appropriations process is fragile. We have been successful because we've each set aside things that we find objectionable and worked for the common good of the committee and the American people. It has been so long since the United States Senate has done its work in this arena and too many others. All of us, Madam President, all of us in this Senate, we have other things we'd like to do, but we devote our time and effort to public service, presumably to the public good of our constituents at home and the well-being of Americans across the country. And whether we do that well or not has a consequence around the globe. The United States of America is a place that needs to demonstrate to others in our own country, but others around the world, that we still have the capabilities of governing. My view is that I've never served in the United States Senate when it was at its best. What I know about the Senate is what I read as a kid. What I know about the Senate as the way it should be is the way I learned about it in history. And I want to work here where we do our jobs. If we fail here, we don't just fail for the moment. Once again, the appropriations process is set aside. When we return in September, I hope we're able to do more appropriation bills, but I doubt that this is the first one to be considered, and I doubt that the senator from Maryland's amendment goes away, so the problems we have tonight aren't going to disappear. We won't see this, and then we'll immediately turn to the consideration of a continuing resolution that funds the federal government at the same rate, at the same place, the same amount of money as we did this last year. Incidentally, we did. It's not incidental. We had the same problem last year. We didn't get our appropriation bills. Not one of the 12 appropriation bills were considered on this Senate floor, and we did. I shouldn't say we had to do. We did a continuing resolution saying we can't decide this. We can't get our act together well enough as Republicans or Democrats or as however you want to categorize people. We can't work together well enough to pass 12 appropriation bills on the Senate floor if we were ever given the chance. This is an indictment of all of us, and I take it very personally as a member of the Appropriations Committee with responsibilities to do our work. And none of us, to go back to the point I attempted to make earlier and got sidetracked, none of us want to be here if we're not making a difference. We have families. We have home places that we love to be. And we devote our time and effort to something that is a worthy cause, but the worthiness of that cause, if it's just to be here because you have your name on a door, you have perhaps an important sounding title, senator, there is no joy. There's no joy for me, and I can't imagine there's joy for others if the answer, well, we just can't work together well enough to do what the American people insist on, demand, and certainly deserve. This place needs to prove its relevance. And once again, if we see failure tonight, that failure will continue, and we'll demonstrate it one more time. Well, they just couldn't do it. They didn't get it done. Well, they passed 3 out of 12 appropriation bills. And in September, as the government is approaching a shutdown, because we haven't funded these 12 bills, we haven't passed these 12 bills, we're once again on the Senate floor scrambling to figure out how we keep the government open. What message does that send to our constituents that we can't even figure out how to have a budget or a top-line number and appropriate money? Every county commission, every school board, every city council has a budget, and they figure out how to spend money in a year. Why are we less than that? Why is it so difficult for us? I want to work in a Senate that works together. I don't expect us to agree, but there's common good that can be found in so many instances. And we are so close. The Senator from Maryland's amendment is about where the FBI headquarters should be located and the process by which that decision should be determined. I appreciate the senator's interest, but this is not even in the jurisdiction of the subcommittee I chair. This is before us tonight because one of the senators from Maryland's successors put money into the Commerce, Justice, Science Bill for the purposes of building an FBI headquarters, perhaps in her home state of Maryland. We have dealt with this issue. Let me say it this way. This issue has appeared before us before. The jurisdiction is in a different subcommittee of appropriations. And the jurisdiction in the administration rests with the General Services Administration, the GSA, not funded by Commerce, Justice, Science, or any of the other bills we're considering. The senator did offer an amendment in committee, and it ultimately failed. And one of the things I know about the Senate is it takes a majority at a minimum to pass a piece of legislation, and the senator from Maryland does not have a majority, in my view, who will vote for his amendment. He can work to make that happen. The senator from Maryland can lobby and encourage and educate senators on the Senate floor and in their offices from now to the time that this bill passes. If he objects, if he ultimately objects because he doesn't have a modification to where he fits in the adoption of what we're talking about, then none of the things in the bill become law, and he's lost his opportunity to make the case to 99 of his colleagues about whether he's right or not. The senator and I have worked to find a conclusion that would be satisfactory, and I've been unable to. We've been unable to. I don't know exactly what my reputation is in this place, but I do think that people think I work hard and work hard together. And that's been the case in this circumstance. But as I've assured the senator from Maryland, I know no path forward with his amendment that allows this bill to pass the United States Senate. So when he decides whether or not he's going to object to the underlying question, the question is to the senator from Maryland is, the things that we worked on together, do they matter more than the amendment that you want in such a way that you're unwilling to offer the amendment on the Senate floor and let the Senate work its will? I think I'm about ready to conclude my remarks, but it reminds me that so many times by our colleagues who are not on the Appropriations Committee, I think we get criticized for being insular. That's not true. We take input from every senator. 99 of the senators in this body provided information to the Appropriations Committee to tell us how to do our work. But there's this sense that we do our own thing. I've always said The reason we have the Senate is to bring the bills to the floor so everybody, those who are not on the Appropriations Committee, have the chance to have their input. I can't turn what was a majority vote against the senator from Maryland's amendment into something that a majority of my colleagues would support, but we are willing. The majority leader has indicated to the senator from Maryland he can have a vote to see if he can do it. While I've tried and failed to find 51 votes for the senator's amendment, I'm quite certain he's more skilled than I am. I'm quite certain that he is passionate enough about this issue. Let him find the folks who would support his amendment, and he can do so. It's been given to him that opportunity, and all he has to do is find 50 senators to join him to say it. I don't think it's easy, but I think that effort on his part is a better outcome. Whatever the outcome of that amendment is, it's a better outcome than this legislation, Commerce, Justice, Science, the Agriculture Department, the legislative branch, and Military and Veterans Affairs. It's more important for us to demonstrate that we actually can legislate and appropriate. And here we are, starting on our first effort in 2025, and we're already hung up on something that is not really our business. I started to say earlier, this issue has been around a long time. It's always been resolved by somebody way above me as a chairman. Sometimes it's gone higher than, certainly, I don't mean certainly, higher, there's not much higher than the chairman and the vice chairman of the committee. But even they have struggled in the past to find a resolution to this issue about where the FBI headquarters should be. And it's gone to the other leaders, the 2 House leaders and the 2 Senate leaders, to see if they can find a conclusion. I can't solve the problem even if I wanted to. Shouldn't say it that way. I can't solve the problem as I want to solve a problem for the senator from Maryland. Perhaps somebody else can in this process, but don't let the work product that the senator from Maryland and I, members of the committee, and this Senate have worked so hard to find common ground. And we were successful and get complimented for the work we did in accomplishing this goal. Mr. President, I will not modify my request.